A locked door to the past. What secrets does it hide? Welcome to Eco Mysteriosa. I am your host, Ravella. I love seeing this community grow. Tell me where you're tuning in today. Hearing from you makes this journey special. Let's begin. It was one of those damp London mornings that make a fire seem an affectation until the first cough, whereupon the great becomes a necessity. Holmes had sprawled into his favorite attitude, long limbs folded, the violin bow lying unused across the arm of the chair, when our bell gave its brisk, decisive peal. He had spent half the night bent over a strip of watermark, holding it to the lamp with a lens that would not have disgraced a jeweler, and I confess I hoped the visitor would be either trivial or quickly dispatched. My friend glanced toward the door with that expression of tensed amusement which, in him, replaced any more vulgar show of curiosity. "Manage the fire, Watson," he said, indicating a bare half-inch of coal that sulked among the ashes. Our caller steps squarely, anchors the heel and lifts as though habitually punished by new boots. Fair resolute man or a man in trouble? Perhaps both. Mrs. Hudson announced Sir Alistair Wraxham, whereupon there entered a figure of the sort one meets in the illustrated society pages, a gentleman of 50, well-preserved, clean-shaven, his neckcloth too tightly tied for comfort and his eyes moving with the guarded apprehension of a man who has learned that discretion may prove expensive. He brought the odor of wet wool and carriage leather into the sitting room and paused, as so many did under the unblinking scrutiny of Sherlock Holmes. "Pray, seat yourself," Holmes murmured, with the cold civility he bestowed upon those whose titles did not immediately interest him. "You came from Westminster by way of Bloomsbury, and your driver is waiting in the street with instructions to stand by. You have changed not your tailor but your laundering establishment in the past fortnight, and you have held your breath recently before a door you thought might explode." Sir Alistair's gloved hands tightened upon the brim of his hat. "Good Lord, not at all. The carriage mud is of that particular yellow-grey I have always associated with roadworks outside the British Museum. The streaking is recent. Your coachman, being instructed to wait, has set his whip across the rail. See the faint triangular bruise of the lash on your left cuff, where you steadied yourself getting out and brushed it. Your shirt is faultlessly made, but stiffened in the bohemian manner. A new habit. Has for the door white powder on your sleeve, chalk, not flour, the sort used to test for drafts. Clumsy stuff, and you would not test a door for drafts unless you feared leakage of something more dangerous than air. Now, how can we serve you?" Our visitor looked from Holmes to me and back again, and then, as if deciding that the conventional defenses would be futile, leaned forward. "Mr. Holmes, my name will be known to you. For 30 years I have furnished the Admiralty with precision chronometers. My life has been governed by strict minutes and exacting tolerances. I am not a credulous man." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice had the metallic edge of a clock spring under strain. "Yesterday at 6 o'clock in the evening, I locked my private study. This morning when I opened it, I found yesterday still inside." Holmes's fingers, which had strayed toward his cigarettes, fell away from the case. "Explain." Sir Alistair wet his lips. "The study has 2 doors, one from the main corridor of my house in Queen Square, and another, sealed these 20 years, that communicates with a smaller antechamber. The sealed door is panelled over on my side, and boarded on the other. No windows. The house is an old one with queer interior arrangements. Yesterday the mantel clock in that room stood at 5 minutes to the hour. I worked there till 6 precisely, left a paper knife lying across a blue memorandum, and set a decanter of claret with a single glass on the tray. I extinguished the fire, locked the door with the Chubb key, here in my chain, and placed the key in my pocket. I took dinner with my niece and my man of business. This morning at 9 I returned. The corridor door remained locked, the seal on my keystring unbroken, yet when I entered, the room presented itself precisely as it had at 5:55 yesterday. The fire was again aglow, the decanter unstopped, the paper knife lying exactly as I had left it. Only the half-burned match in the tray was whole again in its box, and the newspaper in the rack bore yesterday's date, not today's I had put there on leaving. Holmes had not moved, but the grey eyes had acquired the peculiar glaze I had learned to associate with engrossment. "And what of the clock?" "It stood once more at 5 minutes to the hour." "Ah." Holmes leaned back and closed his lids as if shutting out all irrelevancies. "What did you next, Sir Alistair?" "I rang for my butler. He swears he has touched no lock. I sent for Mr. James Fetterling, my man of business. When we three stood bewildered, my coachman, who had no business inside, appeared at the inner threshold. He said he had heard voices and that the sealed door was open. And was it? Sir Alistair's mouth tightened. The panelling on my side was unmarked. But when the men forced the outer boards from the antechamber, they fell away like rotten biscuit. The inner face of the sealed door, my side, remained perfect. There is no sign of tampering. Yet from that antechamber there was an odour, like oil heated upon iron. Holmes's hand drifted again and this time captured a cigarette. He did not light it. You said you are not credulous. Why then come to me before Scotland Yard? I am come from Scotland Yard, Sir Alistair returned gravely. Inspector Lestrade looked at the door, smelt the smell, made a note of the time, and asked me whether I kept burglars' friends among my staff. He suggested that the room had been entered by the window. You earlier told us there are no windows, I objected. Quite, Sir Alistair said with the first flare of temper. I am a clockmaker, Dr. Watson, not a child. Holmes's eyes opened in a gleam. Lestrade will not thank you for coming here, unless, of course, he is coming as well. You left him at your house? I left him engaged in measuring a footprint that is not there, our visitor answered, with a gesture of helplessness that touched me in so self-contained a man. He is to join me here, if you would consider the matter. Holmes rose with that quick animal ease that gave the lie to his apparent indolence. Consider it? Sir Alistair, a room that defies chronology would tempt even a metaphysician. Fortunately, I am but a consulting detective, and time moves for me on boot leather and ash. He reached for his coat. Watson, your hat. We shall look upon this brave door that leads to yesterday. Before we could move, there came a second knock, brisk and familiar, and Lestrade's sharp face appeared in the doorway, his hat rim dripping with fog. He started at sight of Sir Alistair, checked at sight of Holmes, and settled into that peculiar mixture of defensiveness and relief he always displayed when forced upon our threshold. Morning, Mr. Holmes, Doctor. He nodded tightly. I suppose Sir Alistair has told you his version. I've nothing to add, save that my men are taking statements and that there is, to my mind, more humbug than miracle in Queen Square this morning. Indeed, humbug is a genus I have often found housed in government premises, Holmes returned pleasantly. But pray enlighten us, Lestrade. Do you propose to arrest the mantel clock? Lestrade's thin lips compressed. There is a gentleman missing, Mr. Holmes. Sir Alistair's confidential clerk, one Mr. Owen Vale. He left the workshop at 5:15 yesterday to take certain designs for a marine escapement to his master's study. He has not been seen since. And here Lestrade produced from his pocket a small object wrapped in paper. This was found beneath the study door on the corridor side. A bead of sealing wax impressed with the letter V. Sir Alistair stared. Vale uses sealing wax on his private packets. My instruction. But a bead beneath the door. Holmes took the item delicately and held it against the light. Broken, not dripped. The impression is smeared. A man kneeling and impatient. Red wax common enough, but with a scent not of resin only. Do you detect it, Watson? I bent. There was indeed a faint, acrid sweetness beyond the ordinary odour. Carbolic? Near enough. A hygienic clerk, or a clerk who has lately visited a place where cleanliness is enforced rather than cultivated. Holmes flicked the wax back into Lestrade's palm. Your missing man interests me, and your Dormoor. Shall we? In the street the fog had thickened to that particular London broth, in which the great city seems to rub shoulders with its own ghosts. As we climbed into Sir Alistair's brougham, Holmes leaned forward, his profile ablaze against the murk. One question, Sir Alistair. You spoke of testing a door for drafts. Who performed that test? Sir Alistair hesitated. I did, last week. My niece complained of a smell in the corridor, a metallic taint. Mr. Vale suggested there might be a fissure behind the panelling from the old service flues, and I chalked the joints to see if any mark was disturbed by air. Your niece is sensitive to smells. Mr. Vale is attentive to architecture. And you, a man of minutes, find an hour that will not go forward. Holmes allowed himself the thinnest of smiles. If yesterday has indeed left its calling card, we must hope it has also left footprints. And if there are none, we shall see whether absence cannot be as eloquent as presence. We jolted into Queen Square, where the great houses stood in their sober ranks like elderly gentlemen in black. Sir Alistair's door opened before he had his key, free proof that anxiety had outrun the staff's habitual decorum, and we were ushered at once along a dim corridor, hung with naval charts whose ink had faded to a tea stain. Holmes's nostrils flared almost imperceptibly. He placed his cane to the skirting board and ran its tip along the line where panel met plaster. It came away with a faint grey smear. "Chalk," he said softly, "and something that is not chalk." He touched the smear to his tongue as a vintner tastes a doubtful cask, then looked at me in that quick, private way that asked for nothing and told me everything. Here was a problem fit to exercise the finest edges of his craft. We paused before the study door. Sir Alistair fitted the key. "Prepare yourself, gentlemen," he said hoarsely, "for either yesterday or the cleverest counterfeit of it you have ever seen." Sir Alistair turned the key and pushed. The door yielded with a sigh as of resignation. I confess I braced myself for some grotesque trick of the eye, but what met us was, to all appearance, no more than a gentleman's workroom kept in scrupulous order, the knee-hole desk with its dark gleam, the blue memorandum upon the blotter, the paper knife laid across it as a colon across a sentence, the tray with its decanter and solitary glass, the mantel where the small French clock, in an ormolu case, held its hands at 5 minutes to the hour. The fire, a mere red quilt beneath a grey seam of ash, might have been banked an hour or a night ago. Holmes did not step in at once. He paused upon the threshold and let the room breathe at him. His nostrils pinched. "There is your metallic taint," he murmured. "Less of ozone than of heated oil. Whale or sperm, I should judge, with some admixture not of the workshop. Hold back a moment, Lestrade. If yesterday is to speak, let it do so before we tramp on its tongue." He took from his pocket that familiar little convex lens and a scrap of thin card. With the card he lifted, as a cook lifts scum, a film of dust from the skirting near the hinge, and laid it against the lens. "Ah, Watson, the merest breath of grey powder here, and see how it cakes. Not smoke alone. Chalk as from a joint newly tested, and yes, minute particles of iron scale. That argues friction near the panel." Lestrade, impatient, edged past him and went to the mantel. "Clock stopped," he observed. With the air of a man pronouncing sentence, Holmes's tone was pleasant. "Clocks rarely stop of their own accord, Inspector. Sir Alistair, have you wound this instrument since yesterday?" "I have not," our client replied. "It was at 5 minutes to when I left, and so again this morning." "Then either the escapement is faulty, which I doubt given your trade, or a hand has been laid upon it. There is a fingerprint in the gilt at the 3, where a clumsy thumb corrected the minute hand. Fresh." He pointed with the glass. "Even I could detect a faint smear upon the bright surface." Holmes went on to the desk. He did not touch the paper knife. He bent, rather, to the blue memorandum and read, with that swift, silent motion of the eyes, that in him did the work of a man's hand. "The escapement tolerances, Marine Series B veil to bring drawings, plain enough." He straightened, then, without haste, he set the neck of the decanter against his lip, only to smell, and peered through the wine as one looks through coloured glass at a church window. No sediment disturbed. The claret has not been poured since it stood. Yet the stopper shows a smear of recent handling, and look, Watson, where the tray has a faint circular damp, there, at the rim of the glass. A ring not yet dried when the tray was replaced, but the ring has crept inwards as if from slow evaporation. Yesterday's ring would be fainter or gone." "This is young," Lestrade grunted, "meaning someone's been at the things this morning." "Not necessarily this morning," Holmes said softly, "but later than Sir Alistair left them. We will not hypothesize. We will read." He went to his knees at the hearth, drew a sliver of ash upon his finger, and tasted it as a vintner tastes a doubtful vintage. Coal ash, as one expects, but within it, do you not smell, Watson, a trace reminiscent of the workrooms at Kew when they test induction coils? The faint prickle of varnished wire warmed, but not burned. "You have no electrical apparatus in here, Sir Alistair?" "None," the clockmaker said. "My shop is below stairs." "Just so." Holmes's gaze drifted to the wainscoting, to the panelled wall behind the writing chair. He tapped with his knuckles, not upon the centre, which would ring false in any hollow, but at the stiles where a joiner's care showed itself. Then he laid his palm flat and closed his eyes. "A difference of a fraction of a degree between this panel and its neighbour," he said, opening them again. "Hand a draught so minute it would not stir a spider's line, yet it has disturbed Sir Alistair's chalk. Who removed the boards in the antechamber?" "My men," said Lestrade. "They're stacked in the passage." "Let us look," Holmes returned, but he did not move there directly. He walked in a curve that kept him close to the wall, pausing at the inner door as a priest before an altar. The panelling showed nothing amiss. No crack, no bruise, no stain. Yet when he set the edge of his lens hard against the joint, he drew it away with a fragment of something like soot clinging to the rim. "Not soot," he corrected himself, sniffing it. "Graphite." A soft pencil rubbed along a seam to make a dark line, useful to see if a joint has been parted. "Useful to whom?" I asked. "To a man who wishes to know whether yesterday's door has become today's," he answered, and his mouth made that thin line which in him passed for animation. "You chalked for drafts, Sir Alistair." Another hand penciled for motion. We stepped into the antechamber. It was a mean coffin-like space, no more than 3 feet wide, hung with the dust of years. The boards Lestrade's men had wrenched away lay like spent cards upon the floor. Holmes bowed over them as a botanist over a rare weed. "Rot, yes, but not all from damp. See where the fibers are darkened. Not from water, but from an oil that has penetrated from within. If a hinge within a wall has been long unused, a man might soak the wood to free it. The smell we noted, heated oil on iron, belongs here." Lestrade's eyebrows climbed. "A secret hinge, is it? And where's the door it carries, seeing as how this side's bare boards it all was, and the other's neat as a picture?" "Not secret, merely forgotten," Holmes said. He laid his cheek to the upright where the panel met the corner, and for a moment he looked curiously childlike, listening to a seashell. A tongue-and-groove frame, reinforced at the back with iron spars. If one wished to make a door that opened within a wall, so that from the room it seemed fixed, one could contrive it thus. The inner face moves as little as a picture upon a spring. The back swings on hidden irons into the antechamber. It would take skill to make it close without sound, and a mind trained to precision to think of it. You see, Lestrade, your footprint that is not there may be explained by a man who never entered by the corridor at all. Vale, Sir Alistair breathed, as if the name hurt him. Possibly Vale, Holmes allowed. Possibly another. Where does this antechamber go? Nowhere, Sir Alistair said. It was in my grandfather's time a service passage to a dumb-waiter shaft bricked up when the kitchens were altered. Holmes's eyes brightened. Bricked up on whose testimony? My builder's. Then we must offend your builder. Inspector, if your men will fetch a lamp and a small crow, we shall try the lower course at the far end. Watson, before we unmake the house, oblige me with a simple observation. He gestured toward the hat rack by the corridor door. Among the pegs hung a felt hat of the sort I associate with clerks from the city. Plain, brushed, and decidedly new. When did you last wear that hat, Sir Alistair? The clockmaker followed his gaze and frowned. That is not mine. Holmes's hand went out and stopped an inch short of the brim. It has the cheap, clean camphor smell of a purchase within the week. The sweatband shows a narrow, precise head. There is a faint streak upon the felt, look of red wax rubbed to a shine. Our bead beneath the door had a V. Our hat bears its cousin. A gentleman with carbolic in his wax would not set his hat among a master's without intent. Either our Mr. Vale had the leisure to hang up his headgear before vanishing into metaphysics, or another wore a clerk's crown to look like him. The butler appeared with the lamp and the crow. Holmes did not at once take them. He stood very still, head bent, as if the room itself had offered him a whisper. When he moved, it was with the quickness of a striking bird. He set the lamp low upon the antechamber floor and brought the flame near the skirting of the inner panel. A tremulous waver disturbed the flame as if from a breath. Not air from outside, he said softly, but from below. From the cellars, I suggested, from a space that has been recently warmed. He straightened, and now there was no mistaking the suppressed excitement. We will see your bricked shaft, Sir Alistair. If yesterday hid in this house, it did not take stairs. The crowbar bit into the mortar with a reluctant crunch, and flakes of brick dust fell in dull red showers to the antechamber floor. The men worked in silence, their shoulders straining under the confined roof, until at last a fragment of the lower course gave way, and a narrow gust of warmer air struck us in the face. It bore that same metallic taint we had noted before, but sharper now, tinged with oil, and the faintest bitterness of spent chemicals. Holmes leaned forward instantly, his lantern raised. He inhaled like a hound testing the scent of quarry. Precisely so, he murmured. Not stagnant air, but air that has been in circulation, recently and under heat. Our bricked passage is less sepulchre than artery. He motioned for the brickwork to be widened, and within a quarter of an hour we had before us an aperture large enough for a man to crawl through. The darkness within seemed tangible, like a black cloth hung to conceal some stage device. Holmes went first, without hesitation, his lean frame sliding through the opening with the fluidity of long practice in cramped investigations. I followed less gracefully and found myself in a shaft that ran downwards like a throat into the house's foundations. A crude ladder of iron rungs had been bolted into the stone, the metal greasy with recent use. Holmes touched a rung with his forefinger and showed me the fresh smear of oil. You perceive, Watson, that this is no relic. Someone has labored to keep these rungs serviceable. Whoever entered this room by the antechamber door descended here. He looked up, his eyes catching the lantern's glow, and did not return by the same route unless I misjudge. We climbed down into a cellar that was no cellar in the common sense. It was broader than I expected, arched in brick, and partitioned by a series of crude stalls or bays like the booths of an unfinished market. The floor was littered with fragments of wire, scraps of paper curled by damp, and stains whose nature I preferred not to guess at once. Against the far wall stood a workbench, its surface crowded with jars, stoppered flasks, and the black skeletons of electrical coils. A faint blue residue clung to one jar's rim and glimmered in the lamplight. Holmes approached with measured steps. Now the odor of carbolic returns to us here intensified. And here, he bent and plucked from the bench a shred of paper, a formula in Vale's hand. I recognized the neat figures. He has signed many reports for Sir Alistair. See, Watson, a series of ratios for clock springs but interlaced with notations foreign to horology. This is no workshop for timepieces alone. Sir Alistair had followed, his face pale as the lantern's flame. He seized the scrap. Vale's hand, yes. But these symbols, what devilry was he contriving here? That, Holmes said, is precisely the question. We see in these coils, these flasks, the union of chemistry and mechanics. A man skilled in both might attempt strange marriages. He pointed to a metal frame bolted to the wall. It was roughly the height of a man, with clamps at shoulder and waist. Here perhaps he tested stresses upon springs, or upon something more animate. Lestrade gave a sharp exclamation. You mean to suggest torture? Not so crude. Experiment, Inspector. Whether upon metal or man we cannot yet say. But note the ash in this tray. It bears the same tang we found upstairs. Something burned here in the last 12 hours. See how the flakes still curl warm? He took a pinch between thumb and forefinger and dropped it back, dusting his hand. Yesterday's fire has companions in the cellar. I could not repress a shudder. The place seemed to vibrate with secrecy, as though every brick had been a witness. Holmes, could Vale have built this without his master's knowledge? Holmes regarded Sir Alistair. That depends, Watson, upon how far a master sees when his eyes are fixed upon minutes and tolerances. Sir Alistair, when did you last descend here? Years, our client said hoarsely. It was bricked. I swear it. Bricked to a casual glance, yes, but clearly kept viable behind the boards. Your niece complained of a smell, did she not? Perhaps her senses were keener than yours. Lestrade, prowling about, uttered another cry. He had discovered a small wooden case tucked beneath the bench. He drew it out and opened the lid. Inside lay an assortment of seals and sticks of red wax, together with a signet die engraved with the letter V. Among them rested a folded note, smudged and spotted. Holmes took it at once. The script was hurried, cramped, yet legible. To be placed where it will be found, proof enough when the time comes. The hour cannot be turned forward until the mechanism is complete. Signed, Vale. Holmes's eyes narrowed. A cryptic declaration, but in keeping with our theme. The hour cannot be turned forward. A metaphor or something literal. Sir Alistair dropped heavily upon one of the stalls, his hands trembling. Good God, he was my most trusted clerk. What madness possessed him? Holmes placed the note aside. Madness, or a logic that has taken a road we do not yet see. The clue of time repeated. The clock that will not advance, the room restored to yesterday, the message of an incomplete mechanism. All are strands of the same fabric. We must not cut it too early, but observe where it leads. He turned, his gaze sweeping the cellar with that restless hunger of his. There is more here. We must search for evidence of Vale's movements after he left the workshop at 5:15. Did he descend here at once? Did another accompany him? "Watson, hold the lamp higher." I obeyed, and the light fell across the dusty flags. At first I saw nothing but confusion of prints, smears, and dark patches. Then Holmes stooped, his hand hovering over a faint impression at the margin of the beam, a heel mark, narrow, sharply cut, with a peculiar ridge. Not Sir Alistair's, whose boots are broader. Not Lestrade's, nor mine, nor yours. A city clerk's heel, polished, recently shod. Vale stood here. Hand there, see the drag, as though he shifted weight under strain. Holmes followed the faint track to the foot of the ladder. He went up again, but whether in his own will or under compulsion we shall see. He straightened, the lantern throwing his profile in bold relief. Gentlemen, we must retrace Vale's steps above. If he left his hat and wax, it was meant to be seen. If he vanished, it was by design or by someone else's hand. Either way, the door to yesterday opens more widely than we supposed. Come, we return to the study. We ascended once more into the study, emerging from that black womb of secrets into the deceptive civility of polished oak and decanters. The shift in air was almost startling. The cellar's heavy taint lingered in our clothes, and against it the faint perfume of claret and chalk dust seemed a mockery. Holmes stood in the centre of the room with head slightly bent, as though listening to the silence. Sir Alistair, shaken, dropped into a chair, while Lestrade planted his fists on his hips and scowled at the mantel clock. "Now, Mr. Holmes," he said brusquely, "what does it all add up to? A clerk with an underground workshop, a door that moves like a conjurer's panel, and a missing man. But there's nothing here to justify the talk of miracles. He's bolted, that's what I say. Left his hat, left his mess, and gone where none of us can follow." Holmes did not turn. He was examining the mantel again, his long fingers hovering a fraction of an inch from the gilt hands of the little French clock. "Bolted, Inspector? A man does not leave behind proof of his presence so artfully placed if he intends merely to flee. No, Vale has staged an enigma, and it is for us to read the part not written." He adjusted the lens once more, scrutinizing the smear of wax on the rim of the tray, then the faint graphite line at the panel's seam. I could see the light beginning to kindle in his eyes, that grey fire that told me some inner gear had meshed and begun to turn. "Consider, Watson," he said suddenly, "the peculiar character of repetition in this affair. Every feature insists upon yesterday's echo." The clock fixed at 5:55. The newspaper reverted to yesterday's date. The fire which should be dead, but smoulders again as it did then. Even Vale's note insists, "The hour cannot be turned forward." What is the essence of horology, Sir Alistair? The clockmaker stirred. "The division and progression of time," he said automatically. "Precisely. And what is the greatest paradox one could present to a man of your profession? That time could be made to halt." Holmes inclined his head. "Or appear to. Vale has built for us a charade, a room where nothing advances, yet we know the world moves on. For you, Watson, hold this morning's newspaper in your pocket. What we must ask is how the illusion has been contrived." Lestrade snorted. "Illusion is the right word." "Smoke and mirrors, not mirrors," Holmes corrected softly. "Mechanism. Consider the cellar. Coils, wires, frames. What is a clock but a regulated oscillation of matter? What is illusion but the manipulation of senses through order and control? Vale sought to fashion an environment where each sense told the same falsehood, that time had not moved." Sir Alistair, pale, clutched the arms of his chair. "You suggest he used science to falsify a whole day?" Holmes spread his hands. "To falsify its appearance, yes. But to what end? That is the larger puzzle." He swung suddenly toward the door and rapped upon it with his cane. "We must not forget, gentlemen, that whatever was wrought here was not done in solitude." "There was at least one accomplice," I started. "On what grounds do you say so?" "Because Vale could not have placed his hat upon that rack after vanishing behind the panel. He could not have left both his presence here and his absence below without aid. The hat is a signpost, not a relic. It was set there by another hand, one who wished us to think Vale walked into this room and never out." Sir Alistair half rose. "Another? Then who—" Before he could finish, the door burst open and a young woman entered, her cheeks flushed, her eyes wide. She carried herself with the nervous energy of one forced to act against her own timidity. "Uncle," she cried, "you should not have allowed them here. It is dangerous." "Evelyn!" Sir Alistair exclaimed. "What are you doing?" But Holmes had already turned his full gaze upon her. "Miss Evelyn Wraxham, I presume." The niece with the sensitive nose. You were not introduced, yet your presence has been felt in every corner of this house. Pray tell us what danger you apprehend." She faltered under the force of his attention, then bit her lip. "The air downstairs, it is not safe. Mr. Vale said as much. He forbade me to go near it." "Ah, and yet you knew of it." She flushed deeper. "I smelled it. Weeks ago. He told me it was a harmless experiment, a way of cleansing the air. He begged me not to speak of it to my uncle." Sir Alister's face hardened. "You concealed this from me, child?" Holmes interposed with a gesture. "Do not chide her, Sir Alister. She has told us what Vale wished us to know. The question is, why? Inspector, let us hear from Miss Wraxham, for I suspect her evidence may weigh more than any footprint." The girl wrung her hands. "He spoke of holding a moment still. He said clocks lie, that true time lies deeper, like a current under the sea. He said he could prove it, if only he had the proper materials. He laughed when I asked him why he needed so much oil and wire. He said because time must be persuaded to listen." Holmes's brows lifted slightly. "Poetic, if nothing else. But tell me, when did you last see Mr. Vale?" "Yesterday afternoon, just before tea. He came from the study, very pale, with soot on his fingers. He told me he had nearly finished." "That was the last." Lestrade made a note, his pencil squeaking. "Mad as a hatter, that's clear enough." Holmes's eyes never left the girl. "And yet, Miss Wraxham, if he were mad, he was also methodical. Did he ever hint what would follow once he had finished?" She hesitated. "Only that we would all see yesterday again." Holmes gave a sharp nod as if a piece had fallen into place. He turned away, pacing the length of the study with quick, noiseless steps. "Vale is either victim or conjurer of his own design. If he sought to make yesterday repeat, then his disappearance is not flight but demonstration. He has vanished into his own illusion, whether alive or dead. That illusion has accomplices, for no man alone could sustain the masquerade of a house that turns back its hours. We must find the accomplice, Watson, and through them, Vale." He stopped before the mantel, his profile etched sharp in the lamplight. "The game advances. Hand with it, gentlemen, so must we." Evelyn stood trembling, her hands clutched at her skirts as though she had spoken too much already. Holmes, however, regarded her with neither censure nor comfort. His gaze was fixed, intent, as though she herself were a cipher to be read. "You are frightened, Miss Wraxham," he said at length, his voice soft, but the softness carried no indulgence. "Not merely of what Vale attempted, but of what you yourself may have seen. You must be precise. Did you ever witness him admit another to the house by night, or converse with any stranger in these rooms?" Her lips parted, then closed again. She darted a look at her uncle, whose rigid face offered little encouragement. Finally she whispered, "There was someone, yes, once late, near midnight. I heard the knocker, and though the servants slept, I peered from the landing. A tall man, heavily muffled, with his hat pulled low. Vale admitted him quickly. They did not light the hall lamp, but I heard the two of them whispering as they went into the study." Sir Alister sprang to his feet. "Evelyn, why in heaven's name was I not told?" I thought it some matter of business," she faltered. "Mr. Vale begged me to say nothing. He said my uncle's temper would misjudge him." Holmes raised a hand to silence Sir Alister's protest. "Describe this visitor." He was taller than Vale, though bent as though weary. His step was heavy, but he leaned on a cane that struck the tiles with a sharp ring. "That is all I saw." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A cane with a metal ferrule. You see, Watson, how each scrap ties into the next. Vale's mysterious experiments required more than his own resources: chemicals, oil, devices. Such things are not easily fetched by a solitary clerk without attracting attention. He had a partner, one who preferred the shadows, and such a one would not risk entering through the servants' hall unless the arrangement was long-standing." Lestrade let out a sharp breath. "So we are hunting not only a missing man, but an accomplice who may have spirited him away. Do you suggest abduction, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes turned the little French clock in his long fingers, then set it down again. "I suggest design, Inspector. Whether Vale walked willingly or under pressure, he meant to leave us with a tableau of repetition. Whoever entered by night had an interest in sustaining the illusion." He looked to Evelyn again. "One more question, Miss Wraxham. Did you notice the hour of this midnight visit?" She shook her head. "Only that the fire was low and the house very still." Holmes's gaze dropped, and when it rose again it was fixed on the door panel, that treacherous seam. Vale's phrase, "The hour cannot be turned forward until the mechanism is complete," returns to me. The clock at 5:55, the paper, the fire, the wine, each is a frozen token of the previous day. But why 5:55? Why that precise moment? Sir Alistair gave a dry laugh without humour. That was the time I dismissed him from my study. He carried his drawings then. Holmes's head snapped round. "Ah, you dismiss him at that moment, and thereafter all symbols in this room return to it." Vale wished to immortalise that hour, the hour in which he left bearing the marine escapement designs. "Do you not see, Inspector? If those designs vanished with him, then the locked room has been staged to fix forever the instant before their theft." Lestrade frowned. "You mean to say the whole business is nothing but a cover for common larceny?" Holmes's smile was thin. "There is nothing common in a theft so dressed. Vale has either stolen them for his accomplice, or been lured by that accomplice into a labyrinth of his own vanity. Which it is, we shall presently determine. But of one thing I am sure, the house itself is complicit. These panels, these passages, these cellars, they were not chosen by chance. The very architecture was Vale's ally. At that instant the butler appeared again in the doorway, pale and hesitant. "Beg pardon, Sir Alistair, but there is a message. A boy brought it. He said it must be placed in Mr. Holmes's hands directly." He held out a folded slip, its seal in the same red wax. Holmes took it with evident interest. He examined the wax under the lens before breaking it. The contents were few words, scrawled in a hand I had seen moments earlier upon the cellar scrap. "The door to yesterday opens only once. Seek not to follow." A stillness settled in the room. Holmes read it twice, then passed it to me. "Observe the ink, Watson. It is not yet fully dried, and the paper is cut from the same foolscap as the cellar note. Our missing clerk is not yet beyond reach." Lestrade snatched it, scowling. "Then he's in London still, taunting us. I'll have the yard on every station by nightfall." Holmes shook his head. "Do so, but you will not catch him with mere dragnet. He speaks of doors and hours, not of carriages and trains. His mind plays in symbols, and it is in those symbols we must meet him." He looked back to Evelyn. "Miss Wraxham, Vale confided much in you, though you scarce knew it. Did he ever speak of yesterday itself in more than metaphor?" She hesitated. "Only once. He said, 'To reclaim yesterday is to master tomorrow.'" I thought it nonsense. Holmes's fingers tapped the mantel. "Not nonsense, but creed. He believes he can preserve, perhaps even recreate, a moment by contriving its every element. To steal under such a philosophy is not theft, but proof of mastery. If we are to catch him, we must anticipate where he will attempt to repeat his theatre. He will choose another stage, one with the same elements. A clock, a paper, a fire, a wine, each token of a moment. When he repeats them, he will attempt his triumph." Sir Alistair's voice shook with anger. "And my designs, Holmes? Are they to be lost in this madness?" Holmes turned upon him, his eyes keen. "Not if I read him rightly. Vale cannot resist leaving signposts, as the bead of wax, the hat, this note. He craves an audience to witness his illusion. We shall give him one." He drew his coat about him and strode to the door. "Come, Watson, Inspector, Sir Alistair, we must learn where Vale believed yesterday might be repeated. Only there shall we find him, and the truth." The fog outside had thickened into a damp curtain by the time we quitted Sir Alistair's house. Holmes strode through it with the swift, sure pace of a man whose mind had already marked a destination, though he gave us no hint of where. Lestrade hurried to keep up, his boots striking hard upon the pavement, while Sir Alistair and his niece followed more reluctantly. I confess my own mind reeled with conjecture. Vale's cryptic note, his obsession with freezing time, the hidden workshop beneath the house, all formed a labyrinth without exit. Yet Holmes's movement suggested he already glimpsed the thread to guide us out. He hailed a cab with a sharp whistle, bundled us inside, and gave the driver an address in Holborn. Lestrade leaned forward at once. "What are we chasing now, Mr. Holmes?" "The man says he cannot be followed." "Sounds like the boasting of a lunatic." Holmes's lips curved faintly. "Boasting, yes, but of a mind that longs to be contradicted. He tells us not to follow because he has prepared a place where he wishes to be pursued. Vale is no common thief. He courts an audience. Therefore we must discover the theatre he has chosen for his next performance." Sir Alistair's voice was tight. "How speak of performance while my property, my designs, hang in the balance? Where is the practical clue in all this wordplay?" The practical clue, Holmes replied evenly, lies in his tokens. The fire, the clock, the wine, the paper, each an element of repetition. He will seek another chamber where such elements may be arranged. Consider, Sir Alistair, your premises in Holborn where your chronometers are assembled. Do you not maintain an office there with a clock, a hearth, and the day's journals readily at hand? Sir Alistair started, then nodded unwillingly. I do. The room is smaller, but of similar arrangement. Precisely, Holmes said. If Vale desired to demonstrate that yesterday can be made present again, what better stage than the master's second sanctum? He will attempt to duplicate the tableau there. That is where we must intercept him. The cab deposited us before a plain brick building, whose windows glowed faintly through the fog. Within, the air smelled of oil, brass, and the faint sweetness of varnished wood. Workbenches lined the floor, their surfaces scattered with dials and tiny gears. At the far end, a door led into Sir Alistair's private office. The place was deserted, for the hour was late, and our footsteps echoed among the silent tools. Holmes motioned us to silence as he approached the office door. His keen ear hovered a moment above the latch, then he glanced at me. A faint ticking, Watson, yet not the steady tick of a clock. More irregular, as though some mechanism laboured. He turned the latch and the door swung inward. The sight within froze us all. The office was indeed arranged as a reflection of Queen Square. On the mantel stood another French clock, its hands arrested at 5 minutes to 6. Upon the desk lay a newspaper of yesterday's date, folded neatly. A decanter and single glass rested on a tray, with a ring of damp upon the wood. The fire glowed red as if recently banked. Every detail matched the earlier chamber, and seated at the desk, his head bowed over a sheaf of papers, was Owen Vale. Sir Alistair gasped, and Evelyn gave a little cry. But before either could move, Holmes's hand shot out in warning. "Remain still," he whispered. "Observe first." Vale lifted his head slowly. His face was pale, his eyes shining with an unnatural fervour. "So you have come then," he said, his voice low but distinct. "Good. You see, yesterday is here again. The hour stands still. I have proved it." Sir Alistair surged forward, but Holmes restrained him. "Patience. Let us hear him." Vale rose, spreading his hands as if conducting an invisible orchestra. "Time is a tyrant, but it can be deceived. Fix the tokens, control the environment, and the hour cannot advance. I have done it twice. Soon I shall do it forever." He gestured toward the clock. 5:55, always 5:55. "Do you not feel it?" "For yesterday breathes again," Lestrade muttered, mad as a March hare, and took a step forward. But Holmes's eyes had narrowed upon the scene, searching not the man but the details around him. He moved to the mantel and examined the clock, then bent to the hearth, then the tray. At last he straightened. "You err, Vale," he said quietly. "You have not deceived time. You have deceived only yourself and attempted to deceive us. This chamber is no miracle, but a counterfeit arranged to mimic the other. Yet your hand betrays you. The wine in this glass has not evaporated as yesterday's did. It is freshly poured. The ash in this hearth has not smouldered long, for it lacks the scent of oil we traced before. And this clock," he pointed, "has been forced by hand, the thumbprint still visible. You have built an elaborate stage, but the play convinces no critic." Vale's eyes blazed. "You cannot deny what you see. Twice the world has stood still under my command." Holmes stepped closer, his tone suddenly sharp. "And for what? Not for philosophy, not for science, for theft. You staged this charade to mask the moment you stole Sir Alistair's designs. But you could not resist dressing the crime in spectacle. You are an artist of deception, Vale, but art is not truth. The truth is that you conspired with another, someone who entered by night to spirit away the drawings. Where is he?" At that, Vale's defiance wavered. His gaze darted to the shadows near the far window, and in that instant Holmes moved like lightning. He flung the curtains wide, and a tall, muffled figure sprang back, cane clattering against the sill. Lestrade lunged, but the man was quick, striking him aside with surprising force. He made for the door, but Holmes was faster still, tripping him with his stick so that he fell sprawling across the carpet. "Your accomplice, Inspector," Holmes said coolly as Lestrade and I secured the man. "The mysterious visitor of midnight. Let us see whose face Vale has chosen for his partner in illusion." The muffler was torn away, and beneath it was revealed a narrow, hawk-like visage with eyes full of malice. Sir Alistair staggered back with a cry. "Fetterling," My own man of business. Holmes gave a thin smile. As I surmised. The hour of dismissal, the moment of the design's transfer. Vale supplied the theatre, but Fetterling supplied the motive. Together they sought to dress theft as miracle. Now, gentlemen, we must gather proof enough to turn their illusion into a conviction. Fetterling struggled like a trapped beast, his limbs thrashing against Lestrade's grip. But Holmes stooped with the precision of a surgeon and relieved him of a small leather folio concealed beneath his coat. The man uttered a guttural oath as Holmes straightened, the folio in his hand. Sir Alistair, his face white as porcelain, stared at it as though at a serpent. My designs, he breathed. The marine escapement. Holmes opened the folio and spread the contents upon the desk. The papers were crisp, the ink dense and dark. It was plain they had been freshly copied, each figure and ratio reproduced in Vale's exact hand. But Holmes's keen eye noted more. He tapped a corner with his long finger. Observe here, Watson, the faint indentation of another hand beneath. These are not originals, but drafts for sale, made ready for a buyer who would pay dearly. Fetterling spat his words through clenched teeth. And why not? What loyalty do I owe to a man who pays me half my worth, while my skill enriches his coffers? Sir Alistair hoards his inventions, but I— You are a parasite, Holmes interrupted coldly. You provided the market. Vale provided the theatre to disguise the theft. Between you, you might have made the disappearance of the drawing seem a mystery no court could penetrate. Unfortunately for you both, you did not account for the human desire to boast. Vale's hands trembled as he clutched at the back of the chair, his fervor faltering under the weight of exposure. You do not understand, Holmes. I could have changed everything. The very notion of time itself. If men could see it bend, if yesterday could be preserved. Holmes turned upon him sharply. You speak like a metaphysician, but you act like a thief. The contrivances in that cellar were no more than a mask to hide your employer's loss. Your repetition of tokens, the fire, the paper, the clock, was but a pantomime. You wove illusions so thickly you deceived even yourself. But science does not yield to poetry. You cannot halt an hour by pouring wine into a glass. Evelyn, who had shrunk against the wall, whispered, "But the door, the smell, the hidden passage. I swear I saw the room unchanged." Holmes softened, though his tone still held authority. The passage was real, Miss Wraxham. The boards had been tampered with for months. As for the smell, oil upon iron was used to free the old hinges and burnish the mechanism. When you re-entered the study, Vale had prepared it in your absence, restoring every article as it had been before. The match returned to its box, the newspaper replaced, the clock's hands forced back. It was theatre, nothing more. Lestrade, regaining his balance after his scuffle, barked an order to the constables waiting below. They came at once and secured both Vale and Fetterling, though not without protest. As the two were led out, Vale still cried aloud, "You shall see. The world will see. Yesterday shall not be lost." His voice echoed down the corridor until the doors of the cab swallowed it. Silence fell in the office. Sir Alistair, leaning heavily on his cane, looked from Holmes to the scattered papers. My life's work, nearly undone by two vipers in my very household. How shall I ever repay you, Mr. Holmes? Holmes waved the words aside, his gaze still fixed on the clock at the mantel. Repayment is unnecessary. I have had my interest. The case presented the rare pleasure of paradox, though its solution was simplicity itself, once one looked past the veil of symbols. Remember, Sir Alistair, when all seems impossible, it is often merely improbable dressed in costume. Lestrade gathered the folio with an air of official possession. I'll see these placed in the yard's care until the magistrate has had his say. There'll be no more doors to yesterday for these two. They'll face their tomorrows in jail. Holmes gave him a sidelong glance, half amusement, half reproof. Be certain to distinguish the original papers from the copies, Inspector. I trust Sir Alistair will recover his own. As Lestrade bustled out with his prize, Holmes turned back to Evelyn. Her eyes were wide, filled with confusion and lingering dread. Do not reproach yourself, Miss Wraxham, he said more gently. Vale preyed upon your imagination because he knew it was keen. You scented truth where your uncle saw only order. If you had not spoken, much might have remained concealed. Her lips quivered into a faint smile, though her uncle's sternness did not soften. Holmes, with that instinct of his for sudden changes in atmosphere, lifted his hat. Watson, our work here concludes. The air in this office is stifling with smoke, both literal and metaphorical. I suggest we seek the fresher variety on Baker Street. We quitted the building, leaving Sir Alister and his niece in the care of their servants. As we rode back through the fog, I could not forbear a question that had pressed upon me all evening. Holmes, were you never tempted to believe Vale's illusion? The sameness of the rooms, the arrested clock, the tokens returned. At moments it seemed uncanny. He gave a dry chuckle. That is the charm of theatre, Watson. It persuades the audience to suspend disbelief. But recall what I told you long ago. When you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. It is not impossible to reset a room to its prior condition. It is merely laborious. It is not impossible to tamper with a clock or return a match to its box. Therefore, miracle vanished and mechanism remained. The rest followed. And Vale's obsession with yesterday, I pressed. A mask, though perhaps not wholly. The man convinced himself he had touched the very skirts of eternity. In truth, he was but a clerk with a talent for forgery and a partner skilled in duplicity. The mind that might have produced worthy designs wasted itself in artifice. There lies the tragedy, Watson. Not that he sought to bind time, but that he wasted it. He leaned back against the cab's worn cushion, his profile stern against the dim glow of the street lamps. A pity. For all his folly, Vale possessed a rare ingenuity. Properly guided, he might have been an inventor of note. Instead, he will be remembered only as the man who tried to sell yesterday to the highest bidder. I could think of no reply, and so we rolled on through the fog, the rattle of the cab mingling with the dull murmur of the city that moved, inexorable into another day. The cab drew up at Baker Street, and we mounted the familiar 17 steps to our sitting room. The fire had burned low, but Holmes made no move to stir it. Instead, he crossed directly to his desk and laid the stolen folio there, arranging the copied sheets in order as though they were cards in a hand of whist. His thin fingers lingered on the margins, and I could see that his interest was far from sated. You have the solution, I remarked, removing my coat, yet you remain restless. Is it because Vale's delusion still echoes in your mind? Holmes's eyes flicked to me, then away again. Restless, yes, but not from doubt. The structure of their crime is plain enough. Vale, intoxicated by the notion of halting time, created an elaborate illusion to mask a theft, while Fetterling, the practical villain, supplied both motive and means of sale. What troubles me is a detail, a splinter in the mind which refuses to work itself free. I knew better than to intrude upon his thoughts at such a moment, so I busied myself with a lamp and a whiskey. Presently Holmes spoke again, his voice lower, more abstracted. You recall the note Vale left in the cellar, Watson. The hour cannot be turned forward until the mechanism is complete. At the time I took it as a poetic raving. Yet consider, he had already made copies of the designs. Why then speak of incompletion? Because he is unhinged, I suggested. A man possessed by his own fantasy. Holmes shook his head sharply. No, Watson. Even a madman leaves the spoor of reason. Vale was methodical. His figures were precise. He wrote those words with intent. Therefore, the mechanism he spoke of is not metaphor only. Something remained unfinished, even as he played his tricks with clocks and fires. I leaned forward. You believe there is another element to his scheme? Something we have not uncovered? Precisely. He tapped the folio. These papers were the bait, but not the prize. The true mechanism, what was it? Where is it? His gaze drifted to the window, where fog pressed thick against the panes. And why did Vale, even in arrest, cry aloud that yesterday should not be lost? There is more beneath his madness. We sat long into the night, Holmes silent, his eyes half closed, his fingers steepled. At last he rose abruptly, seized his hat and declared, We returned to Queen Square. The house was dark when we arrived, the staff long abed. Sir Alister had retired, and we let ourselves in with the key he had pressed upon Holmes at parting. The study loomed ghost-like, its panelled walls throwing back the lantern's dim glow. Holmes moved at once to the desk and began a minute search. He examined the blotter, the drawers, even the seams of the leather top. At length his lens paused over a corner where the wood grain was faintly disturbed. With his knife he prized it up, revealing a shallow recess beneath. Inside lay a small brass cylinder, no larger than a man's thumb, wound about with wire, and fitted at one end with a delicate spring. Holmes lifted it delicately, his eyes alight. Ah, here is our missing piece. The mechanism Vale claimed incomplete. Claimed incomplete. I bent close. A part of a chronometer? Holmes shook his head. Not a part, but an adaptation. This is no mere clock spring. See how the coil is bound with insulated wire? He was experimenting with electromagnetism, marrying it to precision gearing. It is crude but ingenious. If perfected, such a device might revolutionize the very heart of marine navigation. He replaced it carefully. And here, Watson, is the true reason Fetterling schemed. The escapement was valuable, yes, but this promised wealth beyond measure. As he spoke, a faint sound broke the silence, the creak of a stair. Holmes stiffened, lantern raised. We waited, breath held. Then a shadow detached itself from the corridor, and Evelyn Wraxham stepped hesitantly into the room, a candle trembling in her hand. "You should not be here," she whispered. "My uncle would be furious." Holmes lowered the lantern slightly, but his eyes remained sharp. "And yet you are here, Miss Wraxham. Why?" Her gaze flicked to the desk, to the recess now laid bare. "Because I knew Vale had hidden something more. He told me once, 'When they strip me of all, they will never strip me of the heart of it.' I feared you would not find it." I stared at her. "You mean you knew of this mechanism all along?" She shook her head quickly. "Not where, only that it existed. He trusted me with fragments of his thoughts, as one confides a dream. I swear I never aided him in his theft, but I could not rest, knowing some secret yet remained." Holmes regarded her a long moment. "Your candor serves you, Miss Wraxham. Yet remember, knowledge withheld is often as perilous as complicity. Vale's mechanism will go now into safer custody." She lowered her head, silent. Holmes restored the cylinder to his pocket, replaced the panel and extinguished the lantern. "Come, Watson. Our task is not yet complete. I must see how far this conspiracy stretched, and whether Vale left other signposts pointing to his phantom yesterday, for until every thread is tied, I cannot rest." We left the house as quietly as we had entered, the fog swallowing us once more. Beside me, Holmes walked swiftly, his coat drawn tight, his face set in lines of fierce concentration. I knew that expression well. It meant the case, though outwardly solved, had turned another key in his mind, and that beneath the illusion of yesterday, a deeper truth awaited us still. The fog lay like a shroud about us as we made our way back to Baker Street. Holmes spoke not a word during the journey, his hand resting lightly on the pocket that now held Vale's mysterious cylinder. I could tell that his thoughts moved rapidly, piecing together fresh deductions, though outwardly he wore the expression of one sunk in reverie. Only when we reached our sitting room, and he had flung himself into the armchair, pipe between his fingers though unlit, did he break the silence. "Watson," he said abruptly, "it is no longer a question of theft. The escapement drawings were the surface prize, yes, but the true object of this charade is that cylinder." Vale was not wholly deceiving himself. His repetition of hours and tokens was madness in its form, but in its core there lies an idea of startling ambition. I sat opposite him, waiting, for I knew better than to break in upon his gathering thoughts. He rolled the cylinder gently in his palm, his eyes gleaming. "Time, Watson, is measured by oscillation, pendulum, balance spring, vibration. Vale conceived of replacing the passive swing of metal with an active force, electromagnetism, harnessed to drive precision motion. Imagine it, an escapement that needs no winding, that beats with a constancy untroubled by the frailties of spring or wheel. To sailors at sea, to armies in the field, to any who live by exactitude, it would be priceless. But surely, I protested, such a device is far from completion." "That scrap we found was crude indeed," Holmes nodded. "Crude, but enough to whet the appetite of a man like Fetterling. He cared not whether it worked, only that it could be sold to rival powers, eager to outstrip the Admiralty. Vale provided the dream, Fetterling the avarice. A dangerous combination." He leaned forward, the pipe still idle in his fingers. "And yet Vale's own words trouble me. The hour cannot be turned forward until the mechanism is complete." He saw in this invention not merely utility, but symbolism. He believed he was creating a key to eternity. I shuddered. "A delusion, perhaps," Holmes said quietly. "But remember, delusion often grows from a seed of truth. He had glimpsed a principle he could not master. That is what makes him dangerous still." At that moment came a knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a note brought by special messenger. Holmes broke the seal and read swiftly. His brows arched. From Lestrade. Vale has attempted escape from his cell. He contrived to feign illness, then overpowered a warder with surprising strength. He is now at large. I sprang up. Then all is not over. On the contrary, Holmes said grimly. The drama has entered its final act. Vale will not run blindly. He will return to the place where his delusion has taken deepest root. We must anticipate him. I thought at once of Queen Square, but Holmes shook his head. Too heavily watched now. No, he will seek a stage unguarded yet familiar, one where his tokens may be set anew. He requires a clock, a fire, a table for wine. He requires symbols. And where better than the very workshop where he first dreamt of bending time? Holborn again? Precisely. The Yard will search stations and ports in vain. Vale is a moth to the flame of his own idea. Come, Watson, there is no hour to lose. We arrived at the workshop close to midnight. The street was deserted, the lamps haloed in mist. Holmes produced a key borrowed earlier from Sir Alistair, and let us silently within. The great room of benches stretched away in shadows. At the far end, through the glass of the office door, a faint glow flickered. Holmes touched my arm, and together we crept forward. Inside the office, Vale knelt before the hearth, feeding the fire with scraps of paper. His face was wild, illuminated from beneath by the red glow. Upon the desk stood once again a decanter and glass, a folded newspaper, and the familiar French clock, its hands pressed back to 5:55. The scene was the very echo of yesterday's yesterday. Holmes stepped across the threshold. "You see, Watson, the third repetition." Vale whirled, the brass cylinder clutched in his fist. "You cannot stop it," he cried. "Once more, and it will be complete. Then time shall be mine." Holmes's voice was calm, steady. "Time cannot be stolen, Vale. You are but a man with clever fingers, not a god. Drop that device, or you doom yourself utterly." For a moment Vale wavered, the madness in his eyes flickering with something like doubt. Then, with a sudden motion, he thrust the cylinder toward the fire as though to baptize it in flame. Holmes sprang forward, seizing his wrist with iron grip. They struggled, the cylinder rolling across the floor. I dashed to retrieve it, even as Vale collapsed beneath Holmes's strength. Panting, Holmes rose, dusting the ash from his hands. So ends the illusion. The hour advances whether Vale wills it or not. He looked down at the trembling figure. Inspector Lestrade will be grateful to receive his fugitive back, though I fear no prison can chain the dreams in this man's mind. We bound Vale with cord from the workshop until the Yard could be summoned. All the while he muttered broken phrases, his lips shaping the same words over and over. Yesterday, not lost. Yesterday again. When at last dawn paled the sky, we stood outside the workshop, the fog thinning into a wan light. Holmes regarded the horizon with that strange mixture of triumph and melancholy I had often seen in him. "It is curious, Watson," he said softly. "Vale sought to imprison an hour, but in the end he has only wasted his own. That is the one commodity no man may counterfeit. Time moves indifferent, and leaves behind only those who delude themselves." I glanced at the bundle in his hand, the cylinder now harmless. "And what will become of his mechanism, placed in the Admiralty's keeping, where perhaps wiser minds may find use in it? But for Vale the dream is over." He turned, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And for us, Watson, another case concluded. The door to yesterday has closed at last." We hailed a cab, and as it rattled back toward Baker Street, I could not help but think how narrowly we had skirted the edge of madness, disguised as science, and how keenly Holmes had stripped illusion from truth. And yet, in the echo of Vale's wild eyes, I wondered whether some fragment of yesterday might indeed have lingered, if only in the mind of a man who had tried to stop the clock of the world. The night had barely yielded to morning when we returned to Baker Street. Holmes cast his coat aside, placed the cylinder upon the mantel, and stood regarding it with an expression that mixed curiosity with something more austere, as though he weighed not merely its mechanics, but its place in the larger theatre of human folly. He did not immediately sit. Instead he paced, each stride measured, his eyes never straying from that brass coil glinting in the lamplight. I, exhausted by the vigil and struggle, dropped into the armchair opposite. "Surely the matter is ended, Holmes." "Vale is secured, fettling exposed, the designs recovered. What remains?" Holmes gave a sharp shake of the head. "No, Watson. The criminal act is concluded, but the intellectual puzzle lingers. Vale's theatre of yesterday was a deception, yes, yet it carried within it a profound suggestion. Why did it trouble even you, a man grounded in medicine and common sense? Because his staging touched a chord that lies deep in every human breast, the longing to hold back the tide of time. That, Watson, is why his madness almost convinced. I felt a chill at his words. And yet you, Holmes, were never convinced. His thin lips curved. Because my art is the separation of what men wish to be from what must be. Still, it is rare that I find myself opposed not only by cunning but by a philosophy. Vale's defeat is less satisfying than most, for he has wrecked himself upon an illusion so universal that I cannot wholly despise it. He sank at last into his chair, lit the long pipe and drew a contemplative whiff. The smoke curled upward, twisting into shapes that seemed to echo his thoughts. There is a certain irony, Watson. Vale sought eternity, yet he shall now measure his hours by the dull clang of prison bells. He wished to command yesterday, yet it is the magistrate who will command his tomorrows. One can hardly conceive of a sharper reversal. I was about to reply when a knock came at the door. Urgent but not loud. Mrs. Hudson admitted Inspector Lestrade, his expression grim from lack of sleep. He wasted no words on greeting. Holmes, Vale is in custody again, though it took half my men to settle him. But there is something else. During the transfer this morning, he would not cease his raving. Over and over he shouted, "The hour waits in the cylinder. The hour waits!" My fellows laughed at him, but I thought it best you should know. Holmes's gaze flickered to the mantel where the device lay. He rose, took it in hand, and passed it to Lestrade. "You were right to bring the warning. Say, Inspector, what nearly drove him mad. Do not be deceived by its size. To a visionary it is the seed of a new order." Lestrade turned it over in his stubby fingers, unimpressed. "Looks like a child's toy. Still, if you say it's dangerous, it goes under lock and key at the Yard." Holmes shook his head slowly. "No, place it with the Admiralty. They will know its worth and its risks. In other hands it would breed only mischief." Lestrade nodded reluctantly, pocketed the device and departed, muttering about paperwork and magistrates. When the door closed, Holmes leaned back with a sigh that seemed to empty him of tension. So ends the last thread. Yet I suspect Vale's cry will echo in my memory longer than most criminals' boasts. He was no Moriarty, no strategist of empire, but he was dangerous in another way through the seduction of an idea. The morning wore on, grey light sifting through the curtains. I attempted my notes, yet found my pen wandering. At last I said, "Holmes, you speak of Vale almost with pity. Is that usual for you?" He smiled faintly, a wisp of amusement in the smoke. "Pity, Watson, is not my habit. But consider, the world is full of thieves, liars, and murderers. They are tedious. Vale, for all his crime, possessed imagination. He chose not to rob a till or forge a signature, but to attempt to cheat time itself. That made him worthy of study, if not of respect." There was silence between us for a while, broken only by the rattle of carriages below. Then Holmes stirred again, his voice lighter, almost mocking his own mood. "Enough of philosophy. The case is closed, the culprit's in hand. You may set down in your chronicles that Sherlock Holmes once wrestled with a man who wished to bind yesterday, and that he prevailed not by force, but by refusing to be bewitched." I could not help but smile. "And how shall I title it?" Holmes stretched his long legs, eyes closing with weary satisfaction. "Call it what you will, Watson. Perhaps the door that led to yesterday, it has a certain ring. And who knows? In years to come, when memory blurs, men may believe that I truly solved the problem of time itself, which in its way would be the most fitting illusion of all." With that, he sank deeper into his chair, the pipe sending thin spirals toward the ceiling, and I took up my pen, resolved to record the strange affair exactly as it had unfolded. And as I wrote, I thought of Vale in his cell, murmuring to himself that yesterday was not lost, while the world outside marched implacably into today. The following morning dawned bright. The fog at last lifted from London's streets. Holmes sat at the breakfast table, not with his usual distracted air, but calm, deliberate, as though the tumult of the case had been folded away into its proper drawer. He toyed with a boiled egg while I scanned the morning paper, which already carried notice of Vale and Fetterling's arrest. The headline spoke of "A conspiracy against the Admiralty thwarted," but of the bizarre illusions, the frozen clocks, and the strange repetitions, there was not a word. Those details would rest as so often between Holmes, myself, and the shadows of Baker Street. "You see, Watson," Holmes said at length, "how fragile is the veil between order and chaos. A single man's delusion, dressed in the garb of science, nearly unseated Sir Alistair's livelihood and endangered the nation's interests. And yet, when pierced, it proved as insubstantial as smoke." I folded the paper. "You speak of it lightly now, but I cannot forget the uncanny atmosphere in that study. For a moment I too believed yesterday had truly returned." Holmes's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "That is precisely why the charade succeeded. Illusion does not require truth, only arrangement. A clock's hands forced back, a decanter touched, a newspaper replaced, all trifles in themselves, yet together enough to unsettle even a seasoned observer. Vale possessed the dramatist's gift of staging. Unfortunately for him, drama cannot withstand analysis. His tragedy is not that he deceived others, but that he deceived himself." There was a knock at the door, and Lestrade entered, looking more cheerful than his habit. He carried under his arm the brass cylinder in a case. "Admiralty men came for this an hour ago. They said it would be studied in secrecy, though none of us can make head or tail of it. As for your Vale, Holmes, the magistrate has no patience for his ravings. He'll stand trial, and that's the end of him." Holmes inclined his head. "The end of the man, yes, but not of the idea. I dare say others will one day seek to master time, whether by coil, spring, or force of will. It is the eternal temptation. Vale was but one dreamer among many." Lestrade sniffed. "Dreamer or thief, the jail will sort him out. Good day, gentlemen." He departed, leaving behind the faint scent of wet wool and tobacco. Holmes leaned back, folding his long hands across his waistcoat. "You see, Watson, how the law satisfies itself with punishment while I am left with the puzzle. Yet I cannot complain. The chase was worth the candle." I smiled as I set down my teacup. "Then this case joins the many you have illumined by reason alone. I shall record it faithfully. The illusions, the hidden passage, the accomplice unmasked. The world may not know how close it came to believing in a door that led to yesterday, but your readers will." Holmes's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "If they read with care, Watson, they will see more than a thief unmasked. They will see how reason strips away the most elaborate disguises. That is all I ask." The fire crackled cheerfully, banishing the memory of oil and smoke that had clung to us in Queen Square. Holmes drew on his pipe, a thin smile curling his lips. "Come, Watson. The hour advances. Yesterday is gone, and rightly so. Let us attend to today." And so in the bright light of morning the strange affair closed. Yet in my notes I could not resist one final reflection, that while Holmes had triumphed over illusion, for a fleeting instant I had felt the tug of Vale's dream, that fragile, impossible wish that time might pause, if only long enough to hold what we cannot keep.